First, full excerpts of this. It's a new book. It's called A Warning by Anonymous, a senior Trump administration official. It is not yet published. Anonymous in this case is the same senior Trump administration official who last year sounded a public alarm in a New York Times op-ed claiming that President Trump was basically dangerously unhinged and a danger to the country, but there were Trump appointees, even at the highest levels, who knew that about the president and were trying to protect the country from him by thwarting the worst of what the president wanted to do. That was the thesis of the op-ed last year. In this new book, which is again called A Warning, Anonymous is still anonymous, remarkably, and this author takes a somewhat darker view about whether anybody inside the administration can do enough to protect the country from the kinds of dangers that Anonymous says this president poses. This is a very provocative thing, obviously, which is why I'm broadcasting these excerpts right now, because they are of keen public interest. But in this position, in this portion that we've got, this long excerpt that I'm about to read you right now, there's real specificity in terms of what Anonymous is saying, what there is to worry about. And this section starts with a subtitle. The subtitle is, quote, "He's about to do something." To be clear, there is no seditious plot inside the administration to undercut the president. The steady state is not code for a coordinated scheme to sabotage his policies, or worse, oust him from office. I use resistance in quotes because it's neither the right's fear of a deep state gone rogue or the left's conception of an active subversion campaign. Trump's critics, who are rooting for an actual resistance, have let their imaginations run wild with the idea of public servants frustrating the gears of government to bring down Trump. If this kind of conspiracy exists, it's news to me, and it would be disturbing. Public service is a public trust. Any government employee with such a nefarious end goal should be condemned. Instead, the early steady state formed to keep the wheels from coming off the White House wagon. When presidential appointees started conferring about their shared concerns with the nation's chief executive, it was not in dimly lit, smoke-filled back rooms of Washington. It was done informally, in weekly phone calls or on the margins of meetings. People who compared notes during the workday and in the normal course of business realized that the administration's problems were more than fleeting. They were systemic. They emanated from the top. Two traits are illustrative of what brought the steady state together: the president's inattentiveness and his impulsiveness. Both will be documented further in this book. But coming to terms with these characteristics for the first time had a powerful impact on the people serving in the administration. Take, for instance, the process of briefing the President of the United States, which is an experience that no description can fully capture. In any administration, advisors would rightfully want to be prepared for such a moment. This is the most powerful person on earth we're talking about. But before a conversation with him, you want to make sure you've got your main points lined up and a crisp agenda ready to present. You're about to discuss weighty matters, sometimes life and death matters, with the leader of the free world, a moment of utmost sobriety and purpose. The process does not unfold that way in the Trump administration. Briefings with Donald Trump are of an entirely different nature. Early on, briefers were told not to send lengthy documents. Trump wouldn't read them. Nor should they bring summaries to the Oval Office. If they must bring paper, then PowerPoint was preferred because he's a visual learner. Okay, that's fine, many thought to themselves. Leaders like to absorb information in different ways. Then officials were told that PowerPoint decks needed to be slimmed down. The president couldn't digest too many slides. He needed more images to keep his interest and fewer words. Then they were told to cut back the overall message on complicated issues such as military readiness or the federal budget to just 3 main points. That was still too much. Soon, West Wing aides were exchanging best practices for success in the Oval Office. The most salient advice? Forget the 3 points. Come in with 1 main point and repeat it over and over again, even if the president inevitably goes off on tangents. Repeat it until he gets it. Just keep steering the subject back to it. 1 point, just that 1 point. Because you cannot focus the commander-in-chief's attention on more than one gosh darn thing over the course of a meeting, okay? Some officials refused to believe this is how it worked. Are you serious, they asked? Quizzing others who'd briefed the president? How could they dumb down their work to this level? They were facilitating presidential decisions on major issues, not debates about where to go out for dinner. I saw a number of appointees as they dismissed the advice of the wizened hands and went in to see President Trump, prepared for robust policy discussion on momentous national topics and a peppery give and take. Those people invariably paid the price. "What the F is this?" the president would shout, looking at a document one of them handed him. "These are just words, a bunch of words. It doesn't mean anything." Sometimes he would throw the papers back on the table. He definitely wouldn't read them. One of the hardest culture shifts took place within the National Security Council. NSC staff were accustomed to producing long-winded classified memos. But if the aim was to educate this new commander-in-chief, they couldn't submit a 50-page report entitled something like Integrated National Strategy for Indo-Pacific Partnership and Defense and expect him to read it and then discuss it. That would be like speaking Aramaic to Trump through a pillow. Even if he tried very hard to pay attention, which he didn't, he wouldn't be able to understand what the hell he was hearing. It took a lot of trial and error for West Wing staff to realize there needed to be a change in the White House briefing process. Until that happened, officials would walk out of briefings frustrated. Quote, "He is the most distracted person I have ever met," one of the president's security lieutenants confessed. Quote, "He has no effing clue what we are talking about." More changes were ordered to cater to Trump's peculiarities. Documents were dramatically downsized, and position papers became sound bites. As a result, complex proposals were reduced to a single page, or ideally a paragraph, and translated into Trump's winners and losers tone. Others discovered that if they walked into the Oval Office with a simple graphic that Trump liked, it would more than do the trick. We might hear about it for days, in fact. He would hold on to the picture, waving it around at us in meetings. "Did you see this? Can you believe this? This is beautiful. Something truly special. Dan," he might summon the White House's social media guru who sits just outside the Oval Office. "Dan, let's tweet this out, okay? Here's what I want to say." That way the public would get to share his excitement too. One graphic that left Trump spellbound was intended to explain certain government and industrial relationships. The basic depiction of interlocked gears, likely pulled from clip art, showed how different elements of the government bureaucracy depended on parts of the private sector. The president was so mesmerized that he showed it off to Oval Office visitors for no apparent reason, leaving us and them scratching our heads. Another time, he became enamored with a parody poster in the style of Game of Thrones, with the words, "Sanctions are coming," overlaid on a photo of the president. This was meant to be a teaser for forthcoming Iran sanctions. Trump was elated and tweeted the image out to his followers at once, resulting in a cycle of memes mocking the graphic. Seeing this type of behavior was both educating and jarring to the burgeoning steady state. It was a visceral lesson that we weren't just appointees of the president, we were glorified government babysitters. The feeling of unease was cemented by having to deal with the president's penchant for making major decisions with little forethought or discussion. These five-alarm fire drills, as I call them, seemed like a curse. When Trump wanted to do something, aides might only get a few hours' notice from him before he announced it. They then launched a frenetic response effort, a race against the clock to reshape his views before the tweet went out. This could upend entire workdays. Over time, the last-minute warnings actually came to be seen as a luxury. It's better to have a few hours, or minutes for that matter, to intervene than have no opportunity at all to convince Trump to hit the brakes on some wacky or destructive idea. He's less inclined today to preview his decisions. Here's how it might play out in the early days of the administration. The president sees something on television. He doesn't like it. It makes him think, maybe I should fire the Secretary of Commerce. Or, we should pull out of that treaty. It's really a terrible treaty after all. He might tee up a tweet. Then he bounces it off the next aide he talks to, who is stunned to discover that the terrible idea is tip of brain for the President of the United States and might be on the brink of becoming reality. The aide finds the president disinterested in thinking through the consequences. We're going to do this today, okay? Tell Sean to get ready. He wants Press Secretary Sean Spicer prepared to defend it to the death. Staff throw up the bat signal, calling a snap meeting or a teleconference. He's about to do something, one warns the group, explaining what the president is about to announce. He can't do this. We'll all look like idiots, and he'll get murdered for it in the press, another exclaims. Yeah, well, I'm telling you, he's going to do it unless someone gets to him fast, the first warns. Can you cancel your afternoon? Officials rush back to the White House. The delicate Oval Office schedule is shattered to make way for an unexpected intervention. And top agency executives scrap meetings with foreign leaders, press conferences, and briefings to join the gathering. The conversation with the president is tense. He wants to do what he wants to do. Consequences be damned. It isn't beneath him to attack his own family members, too. Jared, you don't know what you're talking about, okay? I mean, seriously, you don't know. After some dire warnings, everyone will get subpoenaed. This will cost you dearly with working-class voters. This will put Americans in harm's way. He might show signs of reconsidering. Refusing to admit error, the president insists he still wants to go with his original plan, but he backs off temporarily or agrees to a less dramatic measure, averting disaster for the moment. These mini-crises didn't happen once or twice at the administration's outset. They became the norm, a semi-regular occurrence with aftershocks that could be felt for days. Some aides grew so worn down by the roller coaster of presidential whims that they started encouraging him to hold more campaign rallies, putting aside the fact that it wasn't campaign season. The events had the dual benefit of giving Trump something fun to do and also getting him out of town, where he would, hypothetically, do less damage. More public events were put on his schedule, allowing frayed nerves back in Washington the chance to recover. So there's a little bit more here I'm going to read, but I should interject here to say this warning. These are excerpts from A Warning by Anonymous. And, you know, the anonymity here is a consequential thing. The anonymity of the author for this, you know, ostensibly newsmaking book that he or she has just written is a little bit of a conundrum for those of us in the news business who are supposed to try to independently verify what appear to be newsmaking claims here, right? In a normal journalistic context, if you had someone saying, you know, X happened at such and such a meeting, the president said X at such and such a meeting, you could go to other people who were at that meeting. You could tell them what the source claimed, right? You could ask the other people who were at that meeting questions about what the author says happened. But with an anonymous author trying to protect his or her identity, you can't do that same thing. You can't ask people, hey, is this also your recollection of that meeting? Because this author says he or she was there and you were too, right? I mean, you could try that. But honestly, you do that once or twice. When the meetings in question are small groups of people, including inside the Oval Office, you do that once or twice, and pretty quickly you've outed the person, right, who has now written up that account of this meeting. So, I mean, that's an issue here with this new book, right? This new book, which is called A Warning by Anonymous. Because this is an anonymous book, our ability to independently verify this stuff, the ability of other news organizations to independently, in a repertorial context, be able to identify these specific allegations, figure out who might be able to corroborate them, and try to chase them down, it's almost impossible to do. And that's a serious consequence in terms of the impact of this book by virtue of the fact that it has an anonymous author. The White House, for its part, has responded to the publication of the book with a statement from spokeswoman Stephanie Grisham. She says, quote, "It takes a lot of conviction and bravery to write a whole book anonymously." So the White House is dismissing it. But honestly, you know, it's not just the White House making those claims. The author has faced a lifetime's worth of criticism for not being willing to come forward to stand by his or her claims, right? That criticism has become more stark now that we are seeing these witnesses stand up and defy orders from the White House not to testify, right? To stand by their own claims with their own names attached, showing up in person to talk about their concerns about the president's behavior in the context of this impeachment. I mean, if all of these people can stand up and testify and put their names to this stuff, why not Anonymous? Well, Anonymous makes his or her own case for staying unknown in the book. And for what it's worth, the author's representatives say that he or she does not stand to make money off the book, which is interesting. The author reportedly did not receive an advance, turned down an advance, and intends to donate a majority of the profits from the book to nonprofit organizations that focus on press freedom, including the White House Correspondents Association. We're advised that any profits that aren't so donated, as far as we understand it, may be set aside to contend with any legal fees that arise from the publication of this book. So Again, we've obtained these first excerpts from this tonight. I've got one more little bit of this that I want to read you tonight, where the author grapples with the question of anonymity and staying in this administration despite this view of this president. We're going to do that when we come back. We're also going to bring into the conversation somebody who has been a senior administration official, who's been in the room with other presidents talking on issues this serious, who can hopefully give us some, I think, context in terms of whether or not these very stark warnings from this anonymous author are as dangerous as this author makes them seem. We'll be right back.